I need to ask you something that might be uncomfortable. How many decisions have you made in the last few months? At work, in your relationships, in how you dress, what you post, what you say, what you stay quiet about. How many of those decisions were truly yours? And how many were shaped, even subtly, by what you imagined others would think? You don't have to answer out loud. Just sit with the question for a moment, because here's something most people never stop to notice. There is a voice inside us that is not our own. A voice that evaluates every choice before you make it. That asks, what will they think? Will they judge me? Will I seem weak, naive, arrogant, too different? That voice doesn't protect you. It imprisons you. And the cruelest part is that the people whose opinions you fear so much, most of them are too busy with their own insecurities to be thinking about you as carefully as you. Imagine you gave up dreams because of an audience that wasn't even watching. Today we're going to talk about this. Not with motivational phrases about just be yourself, because you've heard that 1,000 times and nothing changed. We're going to talk about what the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago about approval, judgment, and real freedom. And about how you begin, starting today, to live from the inside out, not the outside in. Subscribe to the channel. Because here we don't sell cheap motivation. We use Stoicism as a real tool to live with more clarity, more courage, and more freedom. Let's begin. Pillar Wandering. You were programmed to seek approval, and it comes at a cost. Before anything else, I need to tell you something. Seeking approval is not weakness. It's biology. For thousands of years, being accepted by the group was literally a matter of survival. Those who were rejected by the tribe died. The human brain learned across generations that other people's approval is essential and that instinct was carved deep. The problem is that instinct was built for a world that no longer exists. You don't need the tribe's approval to survive anymore. But your brain still acts as if you do, and so the biology that once kept you alive starts to control you instead. Most people believe that caring about others' opinions is a matter of sensitivity, that some people are just more sensitive to judgment than others, as if it were a fixed personality trait. It isn't. It's a habit, a learned pattern, and learned patterns can be unlearned. Here's what almost no one notices. Fear of judgment doesn't make you act better. It makes you act from fear. And there is an enormous difference between a life guided by values and a life guided by fear of what others will think. This is where Stoicism changes everything. Epictetus, who was born a slave, who had nothing, who lived under another person's total control, wrote something that travels 2,000 years and arrives intact today. If someone offends you, remember it was their own judgment about themselves that offended you. Sit with that sentence slowly. When someone criticizes you, judges you, comments on your choices, that is not a truth about you. It is a revelation about how that person sees the world, about their values, about their fears, about what they themselves needed to do and haven't done yet. Other people's opinions are a mirror of the observer, not a measure of the observed. Let me tell you about a woman named Isabella. Isabella was 33 years old, worked as a designer, and carried a quiet weight that took her years to identify. She was good at what she did, very good. But every time she finished a project, the first thing she felt wasn't satisfaction. It was anxiety, an urgent need to know what the client thought, what her colleagues thought, whether anyone had said anything. When the feedback was positive, she felt good for a few hours. Then she was back to zero and needed more. When the feedback was neutral or critical, her entire day fell apart. She'd mentally replay what she'd done wrong, imagine what people were saying to each other behind the scenes, lose sleep. She told me once, "I never knew what I thought of my own work. I only knew what others thought." That is the real cost of seeking approval. Not just emotional discomfort, it's the loss of your own inner voice. You stop asking, "What do I think?" and can only ask, "What will they think?" And when you lose your inner voice, you lose your compass. Every decision becomes a negotiation with an imaginary audience. The habit that begins to break this cycle is simple, but it requires practice. Before seeking anyone's opinion on anything you've done or want to do, you ask yourself first, what do I think about this? Not what you should think. What you honestly think sounds obvious. But for someone who has spent years looking outward before looking inward, that question is revolutionary. My opinion of myself is the one that matters. Pillar 2, the difference between what is in your control and what isn't. Here's something that will seem simple when I say it, but that changes everything when you truly understand it. Other people's opinion of you is not in your control. I know you know that rationally, but knowing and embodying are completely different things. Because if you had truly embodied it, you wouldn't waste energy trying to manage how others perceive you. You wouldn't adjust what you say depending on who's in the room. You wouldn't stop yourself from doing things out of fear of what someone might think. Most people act as if others' opinions can be controlled. If you act right, talk right, look right, people will see you well. And they spend their entire lives trying to execute that impossible equation. It's impossible because you don't control the filters through which people see you. You don't control their past experiences, their biases, their fears, their mood at the moment they're observing you. You can be completely honest and someone will call you arrogant. You can be completely generous and someone will say you have ulterior motives. You can do your best work and someone will find a flaw. That isn't injustice. It's just the nature of human perception. Epictetus divided all things in the world into two categories. Those that depend on us, our choices, our reactions, our values, our effort, and those that don't, everything else, including other people's opinions, and he was clear. Spending energy on things that don't depend on you is the source of all unnecessary suffering. Let me tell you about a man named Tiago. Tiago was 40 years old, a manager at a tech company, and had a skill he described with pride. He knew how to adapt to any environment. With his boss, formal and direct. With his team, relaxed. With clients, patient. With friends, completely different. On the surface, this looked like social intelligence. Underneath, it was exhaustion. One day, his wife said something that stopped him cold. Sometimes I wonder which of all those versions is actually you. Tiago had no answer, because he didn't know either. He had spent so much time being what each person needed that he lost the thread of what he really was. Everyone's approval came at a cost, himself. The Stoics called this losing hegemony, the governance of oneself. When you live for others' approval, you transfer the governance of your life to hands that aren't yours. And then anyone with any opinion has power over your day, your mood, your sense of worth. The shift begins when you understand that the only territory you truly govern is the internal one. Your choices, your integrity, your character. All of that is within your control, regardless of what anyone thinks about it. When someone criticizes you unfairly, the Stoic question isn't, how do I defend myself? It's, is the criticism fair? If it is, you learn and improve. If it isn't, you let it go, because someone else's wrong opinion doesn't change the reality of what you did. The habit is to separate. Every time someone else's opinion affects you, into which of the two categories it belongs. Is this in my control or not? If it is, you act. If it isn't, you release it. Simple to say, powerful to practice. What doesn't depend on me does not govern me. Pillar 3. Other people's judgment says more about them than about you. Here's something that will change the way you receive criticism and judgment for the rest of your life. Every opinion someone has about you passes, necessarily through that person's filter. Through what they've lived, what they fear, what they desire and don't yet have, what they believe to be right or wrong. That means the opinion is never only about you. It's always, to some degree, about the one who holds it. Most people treat criticism as if it were objective truth coming from outside. as if the person criticizing had privileged access to some reality you can't see. And so you internalize it, question yourself, lose your footing. But think about it. When you see someone being courageous, making a hard decision, following an unconventional path, being different, what do you feel? Probably admiration, maybe some inspiration, but another person, seeing that exact same thing, feels threatened, feels envious, feels the discomfort of being confronted with a choice they themselves never had the courage to make. And so they criticize, not because you did something wrong, but because your courage mirrors their lack of courage. And that mirror is uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations something I find one of the most liberating passages in Stoic philosophy. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. He wasn't talking about literal revenge. He was talking about not letting the other person's hostility transform you, about not descending to the level of judgment, about not spending energy responding to every criticism with another criticism. The Stoic stance toward judgment is not defensive. It's curious. Instead of "why are they attacking me?" the question becomes, what does this criticism reveal about the one who makes it? Let me tell you about a woman named Renata. Renata was 28 years old and decided to leave a stable job to start her own business. On the day she announced the decision, she received more opinions than she asked for. Most of them negative. You'll regret it. The timing is wrong. You've always been too impulsive. What if it doesn't work out? What hurt most wasn't the criticism itself. It was that it came from people close to her, family, longtime friends. And for a time, Renata genuinely wavered. Were they right? Was she being irresponsible? Until she had a conversation with a mentor who asked a simple question: of the people who criticized you, how many have done something similar to what you're trying to do? The answer was none. It wasn't that they were wrong out of malice. It was that they were speaking from the place they lived, from safety, from fear of risk, from the experience of never having tried. The criticism wasn't about Renata. It was the projection of their own fears. When you understand this, something changes. You stop treating judgments as verdicts and start reading them as information. Information about who speaks, not about who is judged. This doesn't mean ignoring all feedback. Honest feedback from someone who knows you, who genuinely wants what's best for you, who has real experience in what they're talking about, that is worth gold. You listen, consider, learn, but the unsolicited, gratuitous opinion, loaded with projection, that one you observe with curiosity and let pass, the objection that will come up is, but what if they're right? What if I'm actually wrong and I'm using this as an excuse not to listen? Good question. The Stoic answer is, apply the character test. Who is speaking? Does this person have integrity, experience, a genuine interest in your well-being? If yes, listen closely. If not, listen with distance. Not every voice deserves the same weight. I listen with discernment, not with fear. Pillar fort de grace, build an internal code that needs no validation. Here is the root of the problem. The reason other people's opinions have so much power over you isn't because you're weak or insecure. It's because you haven't yet built, consciously and deliberately, an internal code solid enough to be your anchor. When you don't have clarity about what you believe, what you value, who you want to be, any external voice fills that void, and you become hostage to whoever speaks loudest, whoever seems most confident, whoever has the most followers, whoever simply voices their opinion with the most certainty. Most people build their identity from the outside in. They look at what others approve of and gradually shape themselves around that. And they spend their entire lives in an endless chase because external approval is never enough, never permanent, and never completely yours. The Stoics built from the inside out. They started with values. What is virtue? What is right? What would I need to do to look at myself in the mirror with respect? And let their actions flow from those values. And when your actions flow from your values, other people's approval becomes a pleasant bonus. not a vital necessity. Epictetus had an exercise he gave to his students. Before any action, they were to ask themselves, is this aligned with who I want to be? Not will people like it, not will I look good, but is this consistent with the values I've chosen for myself? Let me tell you about a man named Felipe. Felipe was 45 years old, a successful lawyer, and had a life that from the outside looked impeccable. But internally, he lived in a state of chronic anxiety about reputation. Every case he took, every position he held, every professional decision was filtered through the question, what will my colleagues think? There was a moment when he was invited to defend a cause he genuinely believed to be just, but that was unpopular in his professional circle. He spent weeks in conflict. In the end, he declined, not because he thought the cause was wrong, because he was afraid of his peers' judgment. 3 years later, he told me that had been one of the greatest disappointments he'd ever had in himself. Not the refusal itself, but the reason for it. He had betrayed his own values out of fear of an opinion that in the end wasn't even as definitive as he'd imagined. That was when he began building what he calls his internal tribunal. A simple practice. Before any meaningful decision, he asks himself, not what others will think, but what he will think of himself in 10 years when he looks back at that choice. That question changes everything, because it shifts the focus from external judgment to the judgment that will remain, his own. Seneca wrote, "Govern your life and your thoughts as if the whole world could see you and read you." Not as performance, as a standard of integrity, living in a way that even if everyone could see you, you would have nothing to hide, because your actions are aligned with your values. When you build this internal code, something fascinating happens. Other people's opinions don't disappear from your life. You'll still hear them, but they lose the power to destabilize you, because you have something they cannot reach, the clarity of who you are and what you stand for. The habit is to build your code, not an abstract list of rules, but concrete answers to concrete questions. What do I value above all else? What am I never willing to compromise? How do I want to be remembered by the people I love? What kind of person would I need to be to genuinely respect myself? Write it down, revisit it, carry it with you. And when the pressure of external judgment comes, and it will come, you have an anchor. My internal code is my anchor. I don't need approval to know who I am. Pillar 5 degree. Real freedom begins when you stop needing to be understood. This is the deepest pillar, and the hardest one to accept. There is one thing that most people who worry about others' opinions have in common: a profound need to be understood. Not just approved of, understood. For people to see their intentions, to get their choices, to recognize that you are more than you appear, and that need to be understood is, in many ways, more tyrannical than the search for approval. Because at least approval you can sometimes get by adjusting your behavior. Real understanding, someone genuinely grasping what is inside you, is rare and nearly impossible to guarantee. Most people spend years trying to explain themselves, justifying choices, providing context, attempting to undo misunderstandings, investing enormous energy so that specific people, often people who don't truly know you at all, will understand who you are, and the cost of that is immense. Not just the time and energy spent, but the distortion that happens when you begin to shape who you are, to be more understandable, more palatable, easier for others to digest. You make yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's understanding. Marcus Aurelius lived this at an extreme level. He was emperor of Rome and was constantly misunderstood, criticized, questioned. There were people who despised him without ever having exchanged a word with him, who built false versions of him for their own political purposes. And yet he wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect, or that will require you to hate, blame, suspect, or curse anyone. or that will make you dissemble. He was not trying to be understood by everyone. He was trying to be whole within himself. And that distinction between needing the world's understanding and needing your own integrity is what separates a free life from an imprisoned one. Let me tell you about a woman named Camilla. Camilla was 36 years old and had a pattern she recognized but couldn't break. Every time she made a decision she knew was right for her, moving cities, ending a relationship, turning down an opportunity. She spent weeks explaining the decision to the people around her. Long phone calls, lengthy messages, exhausting conversations, trying to make everyone understand. And when someone still didn't get it, when they held on to an interpretation she felt was unfair, she couldn't rest. She'd return to the topic, try a different angle, spend energy she didn't have, until one day, after one of those exhausting conversations, she noticed something. The decision she had made was the right one. She knew it. And yet she was more focused on convincing others than on living the decision. She was asking for retroactive permission. What changed in her wasn't a technique, it was an acceptance. The acceptance that some people simply will not understand. Not because you explained it badly, but because they see the world from a different place than you. And that's okay. You don't need everyone to understand. You need yourself to understand. Epictetus said something that captures all of this with surgical precision. First, learn to be silent. Then speak only what is necessary, not as a strategy for manipulation, as wisdom about where to invest your energy. Explaining to someone who wants to understand, worth it. Explaining to someone who has already decided not to understand, that is energy thrown away. Real freedom begins when you can make a choice aligned with your values. Look at it clearly and not need the whole world to validate it. Not because you've become indifferent to people, but because you no longer need their approval to know you did the right thing. That is the freedom Epictetus found as a slave, that Marcus Aurelius practiced governing an empire. That is available to you right now. Regardless of where you are, I don't need to be understood to know who I am. Let's bring it all together. First, you were programmed to seek approval, and it comes at a cost. The cost is your own inner voice. Reclaiming that voice starts by asking what you think before asking what others think. Second, other people's opinion of you is not in your control. What is in your control is your character, your choices, your integrity. Everything else, let it go. Third, other people's judgment says more about them than about you. Listen to feedback with discernment from those who deserve to be heard. The rest, observe with curiosity and release. Fourth, build an internal code. When you know who you are and what you stand for, external approval becomes a bonus, not a necessity. Fifth, stop needing to be understood. You don't need retroactive permission for choices you know are right. Real freedom lives on the inside. This is not a life without relationships, without consideration for others, without empathy. It is exactly the opposite. When you stop living for approval, you begin to relate genuinely, because you stop hiding, stop performing, stop being someone you're not in order to please. You become more present, more honest, more free. And paradoxically, when you stop needing others' approval, the relationships that remain are more genuine than anything performance could ever have built. Before you leave this video, I want to leave you with one reflection. Think of one thing you haven't done yet, a project, a conversation, a change, a choice that you've been putting off out of fear of what others will think. Just one thing. Now ask yourself, if you had absolute certainty that no one would judge you for it, would you do it? If the answer is yes, then the only real obstacle isn't reality. It's the imaginary audience you've built inside your own head. Write in the comments what that thing is. It doesn't need to be detailed. It can be one word, but write it, because naming it is the beginning of facing it. If this video reached you in a way that made sense, subscribe to the channel. Every week we go deeper into these principles, not in beautiful theory, in how you use them to live with more courage, more clarity, and more real freedom. Leave a like too. It helps this content reach the people who need it. And remember, every day I'm becoming stronger, freer, and more myself. Until next time.